Okay, so we were talking about Batman vs. Superman, which brought up some feelings that you have about review aggregator sites like Rotten Tomatoes. What's that all about?
So the thing that I think is interesting about this whole discussion is that you have, on one hand, a collective freakout by, I wouldn't even say so much reviewers at large, not necessarily people that are paid money to critique movies, but just kind of the commentary class in general.
Okay.
They're kind of like having a meltdown because they don't think Batman vs. Superman is very good, and not even just not very good, but like horrendous.
Yeah.
And then you have the collective freak out of fans who think that Batman vs. Superman is actually good and fun, and they wish that critics agreed with them. And so then they're tweeting at them and saying things like, film criticism doesn't matter, and you're just a hack, and all these different things. And so it's kind of become this weird... But a lot of it, I think, is driven by this ominous tomato meter number. So the discussion that I want to have is, first of all, and just be 100% honest, I know that you actually have tomato meter profile.
I guess so. That's what I've been told.
But
I have reviews that have been aggregated into a tomato.
When you are considering watching a movie, if it has a low Rotten Tomatoes score, does that deter you from watching it?
I don't care.
Okay.
I don't care at all.
Why don't you care?
Because I don't really think that that's the point of criticism. I think that there's a consumer aspect to criticism, which is that filmgoers view film critics as that their job is to recommend something.
Right.
And I couldn't disagree with that more. I think that's, and I think if a film critic is doing that, they're doing a bad job. And I think it comes from like Siskel and Ebert.
It does.
But like they were doing the thumbs thing and the star thing, but I think that their purpose for that was a little bit more. It wasn't quite what they were getting at. Like Roger Ebert at the end of the day was a great writer who had great taste and knew how to write about a film, and that's really what a critic is. And is that it's someone who knows the language of film, knows what to look for, and does their best to see what they can get out of a film and to describe it to someone else. So it's really just you have to. I think Lester Bangs in his advice said the only thing a critic has to do is know why they like something and be able to tell someone else why they like it.
Yeah.
And that's it. Like the whole idea of like rating system has just gotten out of control into now we have these aggregator sites saying that like so we kind of judge films based on how many of the reviewers or how many critics liked it. And first of all, I mean the number that you assign to a review is in no way like a clear and distinct indication of what the film actually meant. And another thing that Ebert did that I think a lot of other film, or at least people don't recognize film critics do, is that his star rating was always relative to the genre and the film. So he could give like a really bad movie a good star rating if its main target audience is just like people who don't really like great films.
Right. And I think also with Siskel and Ebert, one of the main differences there is that when you go to Rotten Tomatoes and all you see is a number, so you see like 29% or whatever it is that Batman vs. Superman's at in the green splat, it's kind of like that's the story. Yeah. It's like, oh no, this is bad. When you watch Siskel and Ebert, the reason that was such a great show and I grew up watching it is because you listen to the rationale, and they would debate it, and they would argue about it.
You don't get that anymore when you just go and you see a number with no explanation, no context.
So growing up, I had two reviewers that I read consistent, like all the time, because they were both published in the Oregonian.
Okay.
Spoiler alert, I'm from Oregon. So and that was Sean Levy, who I like met, and he was like a hero of mine when I was a kid. Yeah. He was like the local critic for the Oregonian, and that was Roger Ebert, because they would publish his, not always, but I seem to remember sometimes publishing his. And then when the internet came around, I read Roger Ebert like every day. Yeah. And then I always watched his show. I was a huge Roger Ebert kind of fanboy. I disagreed with Roger Ebert and Sean Levy like all the time.
Definitely.
And I absolutely didn't care. I didn't like stop reading them. Yeah. Like I remember Sean Levy gave, I think it was episode 2 of Star Wars, like a really good review. And then I watched it and I was like, this is insane. Like this is the worst movie I've ever seen. But I didn't say I'm not going to pay attention to Sean Levy because I liked how he explained his rationale for liking or disliking movies. And it seems like Rotten Tomato is kind of an affront to that, is that it's created, I don't know if you'd agree or disagree with this, but one of the things that it's created that's false is this notion that consensus in cinema opinions like matter.
Right.
So if one person likes Citizen Kane and everyone else hates it, that doesn't mean Citizen Kane is a good or bad movie.
Right.
You know, the consensus makes zero difference.
Right.
And what matters is that you understand why you like it or don't like it.
Yeah.
So hopefully, if you follow the right type of film critics that generally agree with you or that you like their writing style, by reading what they write, you can better understand why you also like or dislike a movie.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Because I don't think you should follow a film critic or read a film critic regularly just based on them having the same taste as you. Because I think we were talking about like a critic that you like despise that I read all the time because I think I agree with him all the time. But
who is this? I feel like anybody that I despise as a film critic is a legitimate hack. Let's get that out there, like in the forefront.
Oh well, okay. Anyway, but the thing is like you should. I forgot. Now I forgot where.
Oh, sorry, that was my fault. I was talking about the. Yeah, he's a hack. So when we take the case for Batman vs Superman, the three critics that I care about and like the most, one of them now writes for the New York Times, and I don't even think he reviewed this movie, and he probably would have hated it.
Yeah.
The other one writes for Village Voice now, and the other one writes for RogerEbert.com. The two that I read the reviews after watching the movie, and I actually think that they had like very good reasons for not liking it, and neither of them liked it. But also neither of them were unreasonable. They weren't like, this is the worst movie I've ever seen.
Yeah.
They were perfectly level.
That's all coming in kind of like like a shockwave, like an echo.
Right.
An aftershock of the critics. I don't think you should. I think if you read a critic regularly and you disagree with what they're saying. See, I had this thought and then I just keep. It's just like as soon as I start talking about it, like
it's
it
fine.
Just
Here's a question:
away.
Have you ever been to Metacritic.com?
Not very often. I don't really go to Rotten Tomatoes.
So I don't agree with the notion of review aggregation in general, but I do think that like if you have to like swallow that pill and like you just can't stop yourself from caring about review aggregators, at least go to Metacritic, because Metacritic has three categories. It can either be generally positive reviews, generally mixed reviews, or generally negative. And the fact that Rotten Tomatoes doesn't allow for gray areas or mixed reviews, it's like a critic either has to like it or hate it. They either get a red tomato or a splat. Is absurd. And so if you go to Metacritic, for example, Batman vs Superman has a 44%, and it's yellow, not red, and it's basically saying that the reviews are generally mixed, which is a much better representation of what critics are actually saying. It's also
like, I think the idea of like, if all of these critics are like saying this, that the movie is bad, what they really mean is that they can't take anything away with it from it that they really think worthwhile. That doesn't mean that any single audience viewer will have that same experience. Like, I could go into a film that is just panned across the board and just get something out of it that no one else got out of it.
Absolutely.
Like, because ultimately art is subjective. It can mean something to me.
Like Dune. Didn't you like Dune?
I love Dune.
Dune's an awful movie.
It's terrible. I love it. I saw To the Wonder.
Love that movie.
In Dublin, and I hated it so much. Like I thought it was the worst film experience I've ever had. It was the last film that Roger Ebert wrote about, and he was just like mesmerized by it. And what am I going to do? Am I going to argue with him? Like, no, it was a beautiful like final statement on film for him. Like that was an incredibly moving review to read of just like how much he loved it, even though I thought it was just a disaster of a film.
Yeah,
that's fine.
Yeah. So I think the big takeaway is that not only should people the commentary class freaking out is kind of its own thing, but as people who watch and consume movies, like if a bunch of critics don't like your movie, like you just don't have to care. And that's not even saying like, and that's not advocating this like criticism doesn't matter anymore.
No, because,
it's the opposite. It's like, no, criticism matters for very specific reasons, and critics don't actually exist to tell you whether or not you are allowed to like a movie.
Exactly. Criticism exists because art exists.
Right. And art deserves to be criticized.
And it does.
And hopefully the sequel to Batman vs Superman will be a better movie because Warner Brothers will say, hey, there were certain problems that we need to fix, so the story needs to be more coherent, and
So exactly, like a critic could do a really good job in explaining what doesn't work for a film to a creator who can then make those adjustments if he needs to, or if they need to, and they don't always need to. So that's it. Do you have anything else to add about?
Just don't be angry. That's my just be okay.
Read film criticism. Do it, but read it critically.
Oh, there you go. There you go.
That's good.
Does
that work?
And scene.